Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
So, Phil, you commented last time that I get things kicked off all the time. So now you kick us off.
Yeah, well, we just finished discussing the macro picture of the tactics that are being used in achieving supposedly common goals. We all want a balanced budget. We all want to cut the deficit. A deficit, by the way, that President Trump contributed a third to in order to give oligarchs even more money. That doesn't mean we gut democratic process in order to do it. It doesn't mean that we attack the strength of the pillars of the government in order to replace it with our own deep state advocates. This the American people should be responding to.
That is a great introduction to this episode of Courageous Conversations. So thank you for doing a great lead-in and review of what we were talking about just before. I just wanted to make sure that we welcome people to this podcast as a continuation of part 2 of Weekend Update, courtesy of Courageous Conversations. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein. The voice you just heard is
I'm the ignorant slut, Dr. Phil Nelson, on Weekend Update.
And thank you to our producer, Nicole, who will not edit out those jokes and allow us to go on with our conversation. You know, Phil, we were talking last time on the global level, 35,000 foot level, but we're going to feel this at the 3.5 foot level as well. And, you know, for those of you who haven't been listening to us, let's give you a little bit of background. Dr. Nelson and myself are both veterinarians. So we're healthcare providers, and we do feel the trickle-down effect of some of the government's cutbacks, and we will feel them in the veterinary profession. And you as animal owners, dogs, cats, pigs, horses, sheep, goats, will feel them. And you as consumers of eggs, meat, milk, etc., will feel them. And there's just a lot of again, disruption going on that will have a trickle-down effect. We've seen through avian influenza a huge increase in the cost of eggs, to the point that when Sharon was shopping earlier this week, she wasn't even going to buy eggs, even though we normally have some eggs in the house. So that is just an example of some of the things that will occur where healthcare, human and or veterinary, will be impacted by research. It'll be impacted by people who are employed in the government, in the FDA, the Center for Veterinary Medicine, the USDA, et cetera, all of which can impact transmission of disease, prevention of disease, and the messaging that comes from the human side can impact pet owners' decisions or animal owners' decision to vaccinate their pets. So I'm really concerned about what is the impact, and what do you see, Phil, because you're an academician also, of the Department of Education and the changes that may occur there. So many of these different things will impact us in our world that I just thought it was important that we try to bring it to the concerns we have about what's going on in Washington and how it may impact all of us in the veterinary field and those who are impacted by the veterinary field.
Well, it is important, and we made the decision to take that macro picture that we were talking about in the last discussion and focus more on the effect on the veterinary profession. But again, as much as I want to address the issues at hand that are affecting our profession, I also want us to focus on the tactics that are being used here and the impropriety of these tactics. The fact that we're doing it under the guise of diminishing government. Well, if you truly believe that, then there should be a plan that says that if we're going to reduce the government employees by 10%, why you think there's a 10% surplus? Where is the evidence? If Elon Musk is going to walk into IRS and just eliminate all the probationary employees just before tax season, how is that going to affect deposits of tax refunds, on individuals who count on it? Everybody wants it back, but there are some people who actually depend on it, and there seems to be no consideration for that. I do not understand why we have to come in and hold payments while we are now analyzing the problem. I do not understand why these acts of fiat have to occur in the first 100 days other than for political reasons when they can occur anytime in the next 4 years. I do not understand why. I'm going to be kind and not use my alcohol reference, but I do not understand why a Secretary of Defense must walk in his first week and decide to fire senior generals without any concern or no overt concern about the impact on our national defense. In every case, you can point the potential dangers of weakening our responses to immediate threats. In the case of the USDA, surely veterinarians can understand what it means to hold up responses to H5N1 infections. We already are suffering the impact that it is having on wildlife, as well as the impact wildlife is having on domestic production of poultry. And Peter's distillation of his personal personal choices on the purchase of eggs is a good example. You don't have to be a veterinarian to understand that, but veterinarians definitely understand the potential for genetic recombination to the point that we might have human-to-human transmission of bird flu. The fact that it has jumped species and killed thousands of walruses in Argentina and is in our dairy milk because it has crossed into cows. The fact that it is such a promiscuous virus is a danger in and of itself. And I don't expect a real estate agent to understand the threat here. But I do expect a real estate agent, who is now president, to depend on the expert in the field. Now, unfortunately, he may be depending on an anti-vaxxer who is now head of the Department of HEW. Or HHS, I'm sorry. So we have reason to worry, but more importantly, we have reason to express that worry. And now we have more reason than in most times to take the mantle as the electorate and make sure that our feelings are expressed to our representatives. I accept the outcome of the presidential election. I accept the outcome of the congressional elections. I do not believe that those in the majority that voted for this president voted for these tactics. I do not believe that their mandate was to overthrow the democratic processes. It is not the role of the president to determine by fiat what is legal and what isn't. That is the role of the judicial branch. It is not the role of the president to establish law. That is the role of the congressional branch. It is not the role of the president to determine the disbursement of the purse. It is the role of the president and executive branch to disperse the purse. The power of the purse belongs to Congress. And it is the role of the electorate to make sure that Congress and our individual representatives do their job and keep their role and protect their role. And if you did not vote for this, then it is our job to stand up for that and to express it through our representatives. That is democracy.
So let's just talk about some of the trickle-down impact that decreased funding for research could have in terms of new drugs, new diagnostic tests, new equipment that could be out there, plus all of the researchers who survive on government grants through the NIH.
Well, first, let's talk about the tactic of just suspending the disbursement of research grants immediately without looking at the need for them. We have research going on in infectious diseases that obviously will slow down those diseases. We have research going on in zoological diseases that threaten both human health as well as animal health. It is obvious what that role would be. What is not obvious is that the so-called innocent hiatus in funding causes institutions to put technicians and student workers on furlough. It ends up delaying projects that students are working on, which means that there would be a delay in their graduation, which adds to the cost of education. These are unheralded, unanticipated inefficiencies that citizens bear the brunt on because of a renege on a promise. The system has worked for years. You may not like some of the things that were funded. And if he is able to cut out access and waste, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Bill, part of what we try to do as healthcare professionals and healthcare educators is focus on evidence-based medicine, evidence-based decision making. So really, a lot of what you are explaining is foundationally that the decisions that have been made at a global level are lacking in evidence, that they have been a reaction without taking the time to build an explanation for the suggested changes. And it's these reactions that could have huge detrimental effects. And in the short term, we may save some money and efficiencies, but think about the long term, and I think you brought that as well. Think about the long-term impact of research that gets slowed down, the long-term impact of getting drugs into the marketplace, the shortages that we've seen already with certain drugs and even IV fluids. All of these things could have detrimental impact, not just to our patients in the veterinary field, but to human patients. And if we think back to the pandemic, which you and I podcasted through, and we had shortages of PPE and shortages of ventilators. All of these reactionary changes to cut back are going to have not just short-term impact, but long-term impact, kind of like long COVID in the damage that they create, aren't they?
Yes, and but there are two levels of thought that we must maintain and keep here. One is on the direct effect on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And so a disruption as wide as all grants coming from USDA will be held up causes every recipient then to say, do I pay my employees until I get the grant? It's as simple as that. So if you have a laboratory that is partially funded, by the way, by a $4 million grant, then that $4 million is buying supplies and paying for people and paying for the lab's share of power, etc. And a university must then decide, is it going to borrow the money to fill that gap under the premise that eventually it will get it, or will it be capriciously cut because someone in the decision-making process decides that the university is doing something illegal on part of its campus and therefore shouldn't get any money from the federal government? And that illegality may just be DE that has not been established as illegal except by fiat. And suddenly now, instead of being responsive to the board of governance that reviews these grants, think about this. These grants go through a treacherous process of review before they're even granted. These grants have been compared to other grants. And now we're making decisions based on ideology, whether or not a grant on bird flu should be awarded to a particular university. And if that university happens to have the world's foremost expert in that lab who wrote the grant, that person, those advances are suddenly at risk because of some ideological position in a totally disparate area as a result of this intrusive process that can be funneled up to one person. This is the threat. But there is a greater threat in that the entire mechanism works because of trust in the system, because of the good faith we're supposed to have in the American system. Now, if the grant is inappropriate, then don't renew it. If the grant is inappropriate and consensually can be defunded, then defund it later. But you don't stop it until you get your evidence. You don't act first and then create evidence. Dodge is supposed to save us $3 trillion. There is no evidence as to how we came up with that figure. They have never presented that to the American public. And now our privacy rights are being attacked. We have people rummaging through Social Security Administration to see where we're wasting money. We have computer people from private companies looking at computer software that has my Social Security number in it. And we're not supposed to be frightened?
We should be afraid. We should be very afraid. And, if you look at, and I'm going to bring it back to our home, which is veterinary medicine for just a minute. If you have individuals in the government level who are anti-vaxxers in the human side of things, theoretically, that could have a trickle-down effect to pet owners, to farmers, and we could start to see epidemics. There was a discussion I think I saw in the news last night about measles and how measles has become more rampant in Texas and
Yes.
New Mexico as well. But there's the current head of HS, whatever the department is, would like to stop the MMR vaccination.
Yes.
Because it causes all sorts of different things. No science to prove it, but just an opinion from that standpoint. It's funny. You called the Department of Government Efficiency Dodge. It's probably Doge, but I love the fact that because it really is a dodge from, everything that really is important. It's really taking away from that standpoint. But when we have an anti-vaxxer, could that impact our ability to parvo-vaccinate dogs? Could it impact our ability to vaccinate horses for Triple E and VEE and other diseases as well? Because now we start to increase the likelihood of global infectious disease as we also cut back on oversight for import and export. I mean, we really are opening up a Pandora's box of a very significant disease state, both zoonotic and non-zoonotic diseases that could be out there, and then compound that with an effort to impact the Department of Education, who will educate the next generation of doctors, lawyers, veterinarians, school teachers, accountants, etc. I mean, we really are setting ourselves up potentially for huge fail just for the sake of the nail.
And isn't it ironic that we create a Department of Dodge, and I mean that on purpose, in order to eliminate other departments?
Yeah.
Why would you think that the outcome would be any different? I mean, first of all, we are getting rid of all inspector generals because they have too much control over the president, because they get in his way. And yet that's what I as a citizen, that's what I want. I want an independent agency to tell me that everything that the agency is telling me is truthful. I want the ability to investigate. Why am I recreating that purpose in the Dodge department? Because I want to get my people in. This is not, and why should it be that Dodge is any less corrupt than the agencies they claim? The purpose hasn't changed. So why not just go in and clean it up? And the reason is there is no evidence. You can't just go in and clean it up without respecting the rights of the people that are in it, unless you make up lies or don't produce any evidence, just make assertions and act on the assertions. And that is what's happening. That is what I am mad about, that we're not holding him accountable to his assertions, that we still have not held him accountable for blaming DEI on the accident between the helicopter and the Mexican ambulance aircraft the night before they had even a chance to do an investigation.
You're absolutely correct. In 1776 through now, almost 250 years, we have created systems of checks and balances through a Declaration of Independence, a Constitution, a Bill of Rights, and a series of laws that have been the way that the United States has operated to build those internal checks and balances. Who's accountable to whom and for what? We have built in internal oversight. We call that a budget in some cases. We call it operational excellence in some cases. But to basically undo or question the checks and balances that we have had for 250 years without evidence really does support what you said earlier, in the sense that these agencies are being created to fill the government with yes people who will not hold the current leadership accountable, but will say yes to every edict that comes down. And that's not a democracy, at least based upon my civics lesson when I was growing up.
We have people in government now that came from the Carter administration, the Reagan administration, the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, the Biden administration, and he can only see threats coming from the Biden administration. What the beauty of and strength and depth of our government is that we have been loyal to the Constitution, not to the president, and that we have enacted the constitutional functions of government, regardless of the ideology of a party.
Well,
and it is clear that party is trumping government, that party is trumping country. And I use the word trumping advisedly.
I think that's a great place to wrap with just one or two sentences, which is basically to suggest to all our listeners, please be aware of the unintended consequences. Please be vigilant about the things that are going on, because as people get laid off, money gets tight. Money gets tight, they don't bring their pets in, they don't take care of their animals, and all sorts of other things can occur. So be vigilant of what's going on and let your voice be heard, whether it is through your local constituency, your state constituency, or federal. This is the time not to be quiet. This is the time to share your voice and engage in courageous conversations. Phil?
I will go a little even further, that not only money gets tight because of loss of faith, because loss of trust, and trust and faith is hard to gain, but it's easily lost. It is the unanticipated outcome of this process, the loss of trust. And if you aren't sure that your source of income is secure, it will affect mega markets, it will affect our economy, but it will eventually affect you. This is our time to protect our national character. This is the time to defend the dollar if you are a capitalist. And it must be done in order to build progress. We have to stay away from false history. False histories tend to generate an illusionary future.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Thank you, Nicole. And I just want to say to our listeners, there's one thing you can trust, and that's the fact that Phil and I will be back again with another episode sometime soon. So we look forward to continuing our courageous conversation with all of you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.